Hello, um, and good day from the great state of Delaware in the United States. I'm Amy at Idea Growth, and I'll be today's moderator. And before I introduce our panelists, I just want to welcome all of you to the webinar series. This is our first one in the Power Lunch Summit, and it is presented in partnership with GeoComply, who is a member of IDEA. So in today's webinar, we're going to talk about AI and online gaming and a lot of different aspects that AI has infiltrated in our industries. So before we introduce the speakers, if you have any questions for the panelists, you can either hold them until the Q&A session, or you can go ahead and put them in the chat function of the webinar, and we will leave some time to share them. We'll also keep an eye on them as we go along. And this webinar will be available on demand at the ideagrowth.org website after the series concludes. So I would like now to introduce our panelists one by one and ask them to tell us a little bit about what they do and their experience. And I'll start with Anthony from Fanatics. Hello, Anthony.
Hi, Amy. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Anthony D'Angelo. I lead the responsible gaming team here at Fanatics Betting and Gaming. I've been in the industry for about 5 years now. Spent a couple of years over at a different operator, and been with Fanatics for little more than a year and a half now. So approaching my 2-year anniversary.
Great, thank you. Jill from Sport Radar.
Thanks, Amy. Hi, my name is Jill Exley. I'm the Integrity Partnerships Director in North America at Sport Radar. So I've been helping manage our 30+ league and federation partnerships in the US and Canada for the past 3+ years now at Sport Radar. Previously worked at the PGA Tour and the NBA on the league side of things. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Charmaine.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to be on this webinar in the RGEM month. So I've been in the industry for a number of years, but I've been with Playtech for the last more or less 5 years. I'm head of regulatory affairs at Playtech, so taking care of what we would call emerging markets, new business opportunities as more markets regulate globally, and working, of course, along various parts of the business and taking that forward. Thank you.
My computer has frozen, and I don't know if you can hear me. So if you can, then I would like to have Nick introduce himself.
Thanks, Amy. We got you now. We're back with you. But hi, everybody. My name's Nick. I lead risk services here at GeoComply. I really appreciate everybody taking the time out of a very busy time of the year to come talk and listen to us. The last 5.5 years before GeoComply, I worked on the operator side. I helped scale fraud, AML, and responsible gambling teams. So really excited to kind of share our experiences and have a great panelist crew with us today to talk with you guys. Amy, back to you.
Thank you, Nick. Just to let everybody know, it would appear that we may be having internet interruption problems here because I've frozen twice. So if I freeze, then I know that Aubrey will take over for me. But thank you very much for introducing yourselves. I think we have a really interesting panel here today. I think I probably speak for all of us when I say that it appears as though responsible gaming has become a huge topic in our industry. And it seems to be popping up in regulatory and legislative issues constantly. And so I want to start today by talking about AI's part in responsible gaming. It has and fraud detection. It's given us all kinds of different options for our players. And I'd like to just throw it out there and start this. Anthony, if you'd like to talk to us as the head of, responsible gaming, talk to us about how AI is transforming what we can do.
Yeah, of course, Amy. It's transforming a lot. I mean, there's really a few different applications that I can think of, but the main ones that are really impactful, I believe, are going to be prevention in a sense of proactive prevention or detection of PG and RG, problem gambling, responsible gaming, as well as large language models as it relates to, chat assistance. That application I would say is we're not quite there yet, right? A lot of people who are in need of responsible gaming or problem gambling, information from an operator like ourselves, and we want to talk to the customers versus actually shelling them to a chatbot. But I will say from a prevention and detection standpoint, having the ability to ingest or digest large amounts of information from an operator standpoint, right? How you as a player interact with our platform to then get an idea of where your risk or responsible gambling or problem gambling risk relates to with respect to how you interact with our platform. So for example, the DG did a really good job, at least, implementing this as as the best practices as kind of their their way of prevention and detection. And this, AI and business intelligence models can evolve, right? These best practices, taking triggers in and feeding into a model that then helps us detect and intervene, before a customer does get down that path.
Mm-hmm. Can you lead us through, I think in our practice session, Anthony, you kind of talked about like some of the things that like tell us a story of what a player might do, and then how AI might take that information and then feed us some things that we could do in response.
Sure. I mean, a lot of RG responsible gaming investigations, right? They stem off of reactive approaches, right? So a customer might have talked to our support or had said something that might have been concerning, triggering a customer to then go under a more specific responsible gaming review, where we would look at the customer's account top to bottom. What AI allows us to do is we can then flag things right away, right? If a customer, and I believe we talked about this on the practice session as well, if a customer frequently flags for deposit failures, right, for insufficient funds, right, meaning that they tried to make a deposit using their payment method, and then the payment was rejected, and we get a reason code saying the customer failed for insufficient funds reasons. That's an indication that maybe that customer is playing beyond their means with an affordability standpoint. Not a direct indication, right, but something that might want that we might want to be aware of, right? Or if a customer maybe visited our self-exclusion page in app, right, and spent a certain amount of time there, right, indicating that customer maybe had the intent to sign up for self-exclusion, or maybe you just wanted to learn more. We want to know about that too. A customer who maybe is having remorse, right, or second guessing signing up for self-exclusion. So when we look at those triggers, those red flags, right, and we look at them individually, I would say many, if not all, are probably not direct indications of PGRG, but when you combine them and you can do it with AI in this large algorithmic model, we can then say, okay, this happened for this customer, this happened to this customer, this happened to this customer. Their score or risk score, for example, might be a certain number, and then based off of that number, maybe we do something. Maybe we review the count. Maybe the customer receives communications from us, an email. Maybe when they log in, they get a pop-up that mentions and reminds them of tools we offer, things in that nature.
Great. So I think you mentioned that sometimes this is mandated, right, by the state, but even when it's not, the AI gives us the opportunity to be able to reach out to the customer proactively with a reminder that you have programs that they can use.
Correct. Yeah. So it's mandated, at least the best practices are mandated in New Jersey. I know just in discussions, and obviously regulators have been reaching out, asking us just kind of what we have in place in certain aspects. other jurisdictions are looking to take a similar approach to New Jersey. I will say that what I really appreciate with New Jersey's regulations is that they outline these best practices, these 10 or so thresholds, but then they actually let the operators, more or less interpret them a certain way. And we go through an approval process, but they at least let us, review the requirements and then actually go forward with an implementation with those. But yes, 100%.
Yeah. Charmaine, I think that Playtech has a program. Can you talk to us about how Playtech works in this area?
Yes, certainly. So as such, I come from a different angle, so to speak, from Anthony, sorry, perhaps because we are a supplier to the industry. But what we did back in 2017 now, we had acquired this company called BedBuddy. Essentially, it's a behavior analytics platform, and it's built by data scientists and researchers way back in 2010. As always in the online sphere, in constant development. So essentially it's built on data mining and analytics. So slightly different, if you like, or works more than simply having a scoreboard or a list of markers of harm, because there's the explainability that goes with it. And we acquired that company with a purpose. We're taking a commitment, wanting to help industry raise those standards and enhancing what we can do in the player protection field for many reasons. So essentially what BedBuddy does, it's not reliant, so to speak, on what I'm going to call the more commonly used responsible gambling tools or programs, which arguably there's a lot of reliance on proactivity by the player. This is something that complements it because everything is super important in this field. It's more like working in the background, not intended to outright interfere with the player if there's no need to. But the crux of it is that it is intended to spot those signs of risky play behavior very early on in a customer journey. Because arguably, if a customer has decided to self-exclude, that player is already most likely having problems. So you're already too late for that particular individual. And what it does is also it uses dozens and dozens of indicators. As an online industry, there's a lot of data we have, a lot of data the player provides when they sign up, but also when they're playing. And it's analyzing that. And I would say the essence of it is treating every player, every individual differently, because the way you interact then with the player is based on what the data has shown you. So in simplistic terms, if I have spent too much time or you have spent too much money, the interaction with you and the messaging with you will be accordingly. And that is essentially the crux of it. As I said, we're a supplier, so the uptake ultimately does depend on operators for these kind of solutions.
Right, great. Tell me, Nick, does what does GeoComply have any programs or supply any information to as a supplier?
Yeah, so on our side, as a partner to a lot of these platforms and operators, a lot of what Anthony and Charmaine are referring to is these triggers or these data points that can help build and tell that story. Problem gambling, responsible gambling is a very personal issue. It's something that we can't necessarily create a blanket solution, but what GeoComply can help do is we can take behavioral indicators that are very unique to those players, and we can start to drive those as like proactive signals that can help the operators and help the platforms kind of identify, okay, if somebody has elected into a self-exclusion, but maybe they're going to go around and try to circumvent that, right? There's tools on the device or the location profiling level that can arm the operators to continue to provide that consumer protection. Maybe just to quickly bounce back to maybe the early days of my time at the operators. This was really hard without AI and machine learning. A lot of what we were doing in the very early days was taking just even like keywords that were coming up in customer outreaches, right? And that's really hard to create a very customized solution down to that personal level. So all these models that Anthony and Charmaine keep referring to, that's where GeoComply can kind of step in and also be that, that data integrity, booster to a very, very important topic.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I don't know, Jill, if you want to add anything to this topic. I know that you're kind of specializing more in the next one that we're going to talk about, but I want to give you the opportunity to weigh in.
Sure, yeah. I mean, Sportradar now is working on responsible gaming efforts with regulators and operators. We are using our managed trading system data and our central regulatory platform that we've just developed and using that AI model to build out an RG platform that we can then feed back to the regulators and to the operators. So we do have plans in place at Sportradar for this kind of technology as well. But like you said, definitely not my expertise. Everybody else in the panel knows a bit more than I do, so I'll leave it to them.
All right. All right. Well, thank you. But along those lines, I know that you work in fraud detection and integrity. And, honestly, this was new information to me in our practice session, and I thought it was fascinating and will make me more interesting at cocktail parties. So can you tell us more? Can you explain your work at Sportradar?
Sure. So we have a department called Integrity Services at Sportradar, where we work directly with, like I mentioned earlier, leagues and federations around the world. I think we have over 180 partners now, just in integrity services, 30 plus in US and Canada. And we're providing services such as bet monitoring and fraud detection, education and prevention, an integrity audit service, as well as some anti-doping and consultancy services. So on the bet monitoring, which I think is probably the most interesting and what we want to dive into a little bit more in terms of AI and technology today. So we have what we call a universal fraud detection system that we've been working on for the last 20 plus years. It's got a machine learning model. We've detected over 10,000 suspicious matches to date, which is a huge number, right? Like you think 10,000, that's a lot. That's a scary number if you're a league. Just hearing that number first time, but it is over a lot of different matches. So we are monitoring 900,000 plus matches a year. So a small percentage of those, but they are happening. So this technology, the Universal Fraud Detection System, is monitoring over 600 global bookmakers, offshore regulated, all of them. We're looking at the pre-match and live markets, and our algorithm and our AI technology has a certain threshold for each sport. So table tennis is going to be different than soccer. But we're looking at those matches and we're looking at each of the markets offered. And when our AI model deviates from a bookmaker's line, that's when it triggers an alert in our system. Those alerts then go to human analysts that we have around the globe. So we have several in the US, in Minneapolis and Las Vegas, and then all over the world as well. So they're looking at those in real time while the alerts are happening. And they're normally able to explain those alerts away. So, football, for example, American football, a quarterback's out last minute with an injury. Obviously, that's going to cause a lot of line shifts in the markets offered on that game. So our analysts can go in and put a note on that match and say this alert is normal, nothing, normal sporting factors. It's when we can't explain that. We've checked open source information, we've looked all over, and we can't say for sure this can be explained. So let's dig into it more. We'll look into that managed trading service data that we get anonymized bet slips for in integrity services. We pull all the data that we have within Sportradar. We started an investigation and working with our league partner on what to do next, whether it ends up being suspicious or not. And then we can even take it as far as an actual investigation, including interviews, witness statements, all the way down to players, athletes, coaches being sanctioned or even arrested. So kind of a full process from start to finish of detecting, if somebody is fixing a match that people are betting on.
Wow. That's amazing. So the 10,000 number that you mentioned, is that ones that actually turned out to actually have been? Yes. Wow.
Yes. Yeah. So our team doesn't, we're not just going to call a match suspicious unless we're absolutely certain of it. We have certain flag levels, like a red flag or whatever, like, something being more serious than the other, where we have very substantial evidence. Like we can look at the match footage compared with our universal fraud detection system data, match it all up and say, yes, without a doubt, we can say that somebody is fixing this for whatever reason. And then every once in a while, there's one where we're like, this could go either way. You might want to talk to the referee or whoever involved to see what's going on. So there's different levels, but yeah, when we say something is suspicious and we throw that number 10,000 out there, that is something that Sportradar has deemed suspicious. It's not just one with an alert, because a lot of our games see alerts that can be explained away, like I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like that this is an interesting topic that we haven't touched on. You know, AI is just so magic and so pervasive, right? And it's the exciting new thing. But you've talked about the partnership between the humans and the AI, so that the AI is basically just raising the flag, and then the humans are actually coming in this partnership. Is that partnership something that you see, Anthony? Is that something? How does the human AI partnership work at Fanatics?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a great question, obviously. The RG cases are they're a little less black and white, obviously, than fraud and things like that. So when it comes to prevention and detection, there is a human element that would ultimately review if the customer flagged for, you know, RG and PG concerns. There are some things that we wouldn't necessarily have to touch. For example, if you exhibited, we'll talk about just scoring in general. Like if we're scoring you from 0 to 100 as it relates to responsible gaming risk, if you score over, let's say 50-50, right, or 60, maybe you get an automated message that comes up the next time you enter our app, or maybe you get an email that has some information on the tools and resources that we offer. But as it relates to RG reviews that could result in, you know, actions taken on your account, those are done by humans. We don't necessarily rely on the algorithm to do that. Nor I think should we at this point in time. I will say though that the ability for AI to simplify an account for us is something that we're super interested in. Explainable AI, as it's called. So like if we have an account that we want to, you know, review, the model can do one thing, but having a model or an algorithm, or sorry, AI provide us with easily to digest for humans to read through what the summary is of that account. So that's where I think, you know, that's going to be super impactful for us, you know, once we do have that. So.
All right, great. Charmaine, is that something that you see, or because you're providing services, is it different on your end, the partnership between AI and humans?
More or less the same, in the sense there's always a human as part of that process. And the part I would add, because it's important, is that because we're a supplier, I'm looking at player data, but I'm looking at player anonymized data. Because that's quite important to stress. But that's what it is. So you're looking at the data. There's always someone behind the screen, so to speak, who is looking at the data to show what the data is. The difference with the explainability part of AI is that, you know, I mentioned that we have dozens of indicators. I mean, like literally 70 plus. And it's never just 1, 2, 3, or 4 indicators. It's the mix of those together. And over time, if you think of, you know, in very simple terms, like a traffic light, if you like, you're looking at that fluctuation, you know, when the green is going to yellow is going to red, but also what is it showing you? Is it, I'm looking at not only the fact that an individual played at night, I'm looking at whether that individual is playing later and later into the night. But that in itself might not be enough to trigger something. In combination with that, you know, data might show you that they're fluctuating their type of gameplay, you know, moving from casino to sports betting, for instance, or they're changing their type of payment methods. So there's a lot that comes together. And then there's the individual behind it that is seeing that data. And we are not, as a supplier, are looking at that data. But then you're working with the operator, because those players belong to the operator. But you're also providing the possibility as, like, you know, there's an obvious spotting of an individual and you need to intervene. And then the assistance is the type of messaging that you provide the player. And the intention is to never alarm the individual. You're trying to message it positively. So it's essential to talk about healthy play in the digital environment in a way, right? Because you want to say, like, oh, you know, players like you usually take a coffee break. So you're trying to interact with the player. So again, there's the human element, as Anthony was saying always.
Thank you. So Jill, coming back to your what you do, can you tell us a story that maybe illustrates you know, how the AI and the humans work together, and what triggered something and what you saw.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of examples. I mean, a couple years ago, we found several suspicious matches with an Austrian football league or soccer. Um, so I think that it was back in 2021. Several matches were found to be suspicious within our system. You know, there were several alerts popping up within the pre-match and live markets. Obviously, our team was highly aware and looking at them very closely and ultimately deemed them suspicious. And we ended up working with this Austrian football league on a full investigation from start to finish. Our UFDS, or Universal Fraud Detection System, data led to helping that league out with sanctioning the players, and then mapping out the analysis of a whole match fixing syndicate within this network. And so 9 individuals were ended up being found guilty of serious commercial fraud, with sentences ranging from 24 months and fines up to 20,000 euros. So I think it's really, really cool when we have that data that we're using with AI and with our system leads all the way to these convictions and arrests. So that's just one small example. You know, you see here in the US specifically, I mean, everybody probably remembers last year, was it? Yeah, May of 2023, when, you know, the Alabama baseball coach was caught tipping off information to a bettor in Ohio about the starting pitcher being out. He recently, you know, went to court for that, and is, you know, he's obviously sanctioned by the NCAA and probably won't coach college baseball again, at least anytime soon. So that was an example of leaked inside information where he leaked a player being out, and then the bet actually, the player tried to place a bet that was so large that it alerted the operator. So that's kind of a system where you see the operator on the side of it, like being like, hey, this bet right here is a little suspicious, and then alerting the other parties involved. So a couple of different examples there of leaked inside information where it's like just 2 small players in it, all the way up to a full match fixing syndicate around the globe.
I think that you mentioned that in the Ohio case, when the humans came in, they thought to look at the video footage.
Well, he was texting. Yeah, he was
Oh, I
texting
see.
his friend in Ohio. You know, this player is going to be out.
Right.
Place
So
the
you
bet as
could
fast
see-
as possible,
you could
something like that. Yeah,
Yeah, you could
yeah,
literally see that and match it
yeah.
up.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we've seen instances in soccer matches, like huge world qualifying matches, years and years ago, where you can match up the bets being placed with a referee calling a handball that's not a handball. So you can see that people are starting to bet the over for the first half all of a sudden, and then you realize when those bets are being placed, and then you see this ref call a handball that you watch the footage, there's clearly no handball. So that was a world qualifying match that we matched our technology up with the match footage years ago. Yeah, so really cool to line it all up.
Wow, it's amazing. Um, uh, thank you so much for sharing that. So, Nick, would you like to weigh in and share some of what GeoComply does in this area? Is this relevant? I don't want to ask you about the wrong thing, but
No, Amy, this is I think it's very relevant between my time with the operator and now with like GeoComply is bridging that gap between the human and AI is about speed to usually either fraud detection or increasing consumer protection. So a real good example that comes to mind from my time at like an operator was we were using AI and machine learning to enhance our crisis processes. So for example, if an individual maybe made a threat or had some type of concerning language in their outreach to a customer support team, we could use AI to create a trigger around that. And I remember a case actually where a customer had like reached out, their account was under review, but he was making threats actually against his child, like potentially creating harm against them, right? And instead of that ticket sitting in the queue, AI was able to actually like generate an acceleration to a crisis team at the operator I was working at, and actually using some geolocation technology and our law enforcement liaisons, we were able to actually conduct a welfare check, and that was done within 15 minutes of that customer reaching out to actually getting law enforcement to the door. And thankfully, in that case, the child was safe, and we were able to give that individual some assistance. But I think that's one of the powerful kind of stories that goes kind of unwritten in the regulated gaming space, and it's really unfortunate to see maybe misinformed legislation getting put out in the news recently. There's hundreds of individuals on trust and safety teams, responsible gambling teams, platforms like jails, there's a really, really big community of people that are doing the right thing, even though nobody's really watching. And that's powered by, machine learning and data as a tool. But, Charmaine, I think hit a really good point. A lot of what we're doing to do these accelerations with AI is based on a lot of anonymized data. I think as an industry, do a really, really good job of taking privacy and that personal information very seriously. So it's unfortunate to see, maybe misinformed, direction of or perception of our industry when there's hundreds of people that, I'm very lucky to work with day in and day out, doing the right thing to protect people.
Yeah, I do think, I mean, the positive stories, I think that we're all afraid of AI, right? We're not sure, like, but it's so interesting to hear like the positive side of it. And I'm constantly reminded that this is only happening in the regulated industry. And there's a huge illegal, unregulated industry operating out there that also has access to AI. Right? We have access to AI and we're using it to help. They have access to AI, and it makes, I think, the unregulated sites even less safe for players, and it intensifies the need for states to legalize online gaming so that it can, we can benefit from the positive things that we're doing. So I'm excited to hear about that. So one of the things that we also talked about, and Nick, I think you touched on this, were there's some of the things that we expect AI to be able to do, right? Right, and that's to aggregate and sift through millions of and maybe billions of actions that are happening online, and then sift up trends and also individual stories to the top that then human beings can take action on. But I think we talked about some things that we wouldn't have expected that AI would bring, and that have been interesting and helped our industry. Can you share some of those thoughts?
Yeah, I'm happy to, and it's actually really a great opportunity on this platform to share again the stories of the individuals that are really working behind the scenes. And I think one of those unexpected benefits that AI has done is it's actually been able to bring individuals into our space, into our industry that maybe traditionally would not have had maybe the idea or the confidence to go in. A really good example of that is I have an analyst on my team, and she has a psychology and a sociology background, right? And maybe somebody with that type of background maybe be a little intimidated coming into the space where we're a very tech-heavy industry. There's a lot of data. People get scared around coding. I'm an awful coder. I cannot code to save my life, right? But AI offers, me a tool to be able to write simple queries and to be able to manage and sift through large data sets. And I think that's been a really strong benefit for the industry as a whole, is we're starting to bring in people with more specialized consumer protection and backgrounds to provide, like I mentioned in the beginning, a very tailored solution to problem gambling and responsible gambling. And I think as we evolve as an industry and continue to grow, we need people with very diverse backgrounds and very specialized skills to increase those consumer protections. And AI has just become that extra tool in the toolkit to be able to allow us to meet those people, to bring them in. And it's been a great benefit to just to see people that traditionally maybe have no sports background, or like I said, no coding background. We're bringing really, really smart people into our space, and that's really important, again, for consumer protection.
Charmaine, did you want to weigh in on this? Is this something that you've seen at Playtech?
certainly 100%. I mean, I've been talking about Bed Buddy on this particular webinar, but actually it forms part of our Playtech Protect, and it goes along the lines of what Nick was also saying. It's not just Bed Buddy and someone behind it, data scientist, yes. You are actually, when you're working on the engagement part, so I talked about responsible gambling messaging. You don't invent those words either. There's science behind it, so to speak. Everything is research, everything is trialed, and you do work with researchers to constantly improve and enhance in this space. And certainly, I think, Nick, you've touched upon a very good point. More and more people have come into the gambling space, the online gambling space, whereas probably a couple of years back, many would have shied away. Many now come in because they understand it's not only gambling, it's in the online sphere. So a lot of the things that we're talking about here can be equally valid in other online services, right? When you talk about digital health and protecting players online. And I think it's bringing more and more of us together and more of us invested in this sphere. And I think the other element, I suppose, I'm a bit personally attached to is, as I said, ultimately, these kind of solutions, I can talk about Bed Buddy, but there's many out there. They exist. The uptake is on operators. And sometimes I think if there is not that regulatory push, we might be slower in the uptake of this. I mean, Anthony mentioned New Jersey. I think they were smart. They're saying, a step ahead of the curve, so to speak, in saying, listen, we've been, regulating our market for a couple of years now. We know that at some point something might come up for closer scrutiny. Let's be out there and set out these guidelines. I think, and again, like Anthony said, they're not prescriptive. They're telling you that they expect you to do something, but they're not prescriptive. And that should be for us something to take on board, because in other markets, the step in has been really restrictive. And I would welcome that there's more states, especially when it comes to iGaming and, problem gambling concerns related to online casino. If more states came in a priori and said, in legalizing this, we want to definitely make sure the player protection is equally well regulated.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that New Jersey has been an amazing model, and they've been very wise and forward-looking, and obviously they were way before any other state. And I'm reminded that Dave Rebuck, who led that team, will be speaking on our webinar tomorrow at noon. Yeah, so thank you. Have you, I don't know if you feel like you've seen the same thing, Anthony, we didn't talk about it before, but have you felt as though there are, early on in our industry, there was much more maybe technology and legal people, and now a greater number of disciplines are being brought in. Do you see that at
Yeah, for
Fnatic?
sure. 100%. I mean, a lot of our workforce here, obviously, comes from other operators, but a vast portion of them come from outside the industry. And I think AI allows folks to kind of, as Nicholas had kind of alluded to, like it's an easier barrier to entry, I think, into our industry this way. I consider it kind of similar to if I'm looking at a resume, on a team that's, that'll be growing, obviously. If I'm looking at a resume and, same way, I came from financial services before here, and proficiencies in PowerPoint, proficiencies in Excel, and things like that, and Microsoft Access are always great tools to have in your belt. If I see a resume that says proficient in AI, that's something that I'm generally more interested in, for sure, because I know that that's going to be a tool, and it already is, right? A tool that people are going to use to simplify their own day, even outside of RG, just being more productive, being more efficient during the workday. I mean, why would we not use this tool that has the ability to, completely change how we as humans interact with our workday?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. So I don't know if we have covered everything. Does anyone, let's see, I think I'm not frozen. Good. Is there anything else that, Nick, that you think that you'd like to add that we haven't talked about, or Jill?
Yeah, I'll just add one more, I think, note on, again, this, I think, ill-informed perception of AI is, I think, whether it's GeoComply or our partners or just the space in general, the regulated space of online gaming, I think the emphasis on privacy and using more anonymized data, hashing data is I think more widely used, that provides that protection again to the customer. And I think the amount of training also that goes through to use even AI in our day-to-day. I mean, GeoComply has a robust training program that my chief privacy officer will be very happy. I did all my trainings on time this year, and everything's up to date. But I think it's again, we are taking time again to invest in how to properly use the tool. And I think maybe we can be, maybe as an industry, maybe we need to be more transparent about that, and to, again, to increase that customer trust, because that is, I think, the big difference of what separates us in the regulated industry versus the unregulated industry is the consumer needs to be able to trust how their money is being perceived, taken, given back, how they're interacting with the platform, how, you know, their geolocation is being collected. You know, there's a wide range of very sensitive topics that, you know, I think as an industry, we do a really good job of protecting on a consumer level. And I think we just need to, maybe as an industry, just highlight that even more for everybody.
That's a great point, and we are going to do that in our social media. I'm glad that you brought that up. So let me say to everyone who's listening today, please put your questions into the chat and we will begin answering those questions. And we have our first one now. I love it. The recent federal bill, the Safe Bet Act, which I have already said on social media is anything but, takes aim at the use of AI for regulated sports betting. How do the panelists view this proposed law? What problem do you think these lawmakers are trying to address? And do you think the proposed law could have unintended consequences? Hell yes. Okay, let's start with the first question. How do the panelists view this proposed law? I'm assuming that everybody's familiar with it.
I can go. Yes, we are. I mean, the one thing that struck me is precisely the one thing that came out in the question. If you are putting something out now, whether we like it or not, but you're putting it out with the intention of protecting players, and then in my personal view, short-sightedness in, I think what you said enough about it earlier, Nick, lack of understanding in a way of how AI can be utilized. And that to me is like a serious shortfall in a way. So we're putting something out there for something at federal level that you want to propose. And the one key tool that more and more markets are implementing worldwide, including, for example, Brazil, about to regulate its market, Ontario. The one thing that really, really works so well is the one thing that you seem to not be aware of. It's really a bit outdated, to be honest with you, in not knowing that, because what do you want to propose otherwise? That a player should set limits? Of course, we all know that. We're trying to enhance what we do in this field.
I'll just quickly piggyback on, I think,
Yes.
what I was mentioning earlier. Again, I think it's the intention of customer protection, I think is always should be top of mind for everybody. But I think the bill, unfortunately, misses the mark on this. Again, like I mentioned earlier, seems really misinformed. It really, I think, undercuts hundreds of people that work tirelessly day in and day out. This is a 24/7 business, and you know, at any given time, if you need help for problem gambling, responsible gambling, if maybe you're a victim of fraud and you are trying to recover money, you know, there are teams all over the globe that work tirelessly to bring that you know, integrity into our space. So I really encourage anybody that is maybe you know, trying to learn more about the bill, or maybe how we can, you know, work together as an industry. I think that's one thing that the regulated space has always been really forthcoming, is we want to be partners on, you know, the regulatory and the private side. So I definitely really encourage, you know, individuals to talk to the people who are in the day-to-day and see these, you know, very challenging topics to see how we can maybe work better together, because I feel it was a very maybe one-sided point of view.
You know, the question that the questioner asked, our anonymous questioner said, what problem do you think these lawmakers are trying to address? So, and I think that's a really insightful question, right? Because obviously all of us who have expressed an opinion here think that they've missed the mark, right? But there's something that's driving. What is the problem that we think that they're trying to address? Would somebody like to weigh in on that? And in doing so, I think the last question that the questioner asked, factors in, which is what are the unintended consequences likely to be? Not that we think that this would pass, but if it did. Charmaine?
It's going back to what we've all been talking about, I suppose in a part of it, put it this way, comes from a right place in saying, listen, there are risks associated with gambling. We need to make sure that protections are in place. And you can say, okay to that, and that there should be no more that can be done, always, of course. But states that have been regulating iGaming, like New Jersey, are in fact I'm not even going to use the word step up. I'm going to enhance their player protection. And as Anthony said earlier, there are other states that have been looking to improve. In some other states, they're still at a phase for iGaming, at least, where they're still talking about legalizing iGaming. And then, the regulator can proceed and do their work. Should we take more on the journey at the legalization point of view? I will say maybe. But it's not that there is nothing, because I think in every piece of legislation or bill that is being proposed, you always see a section that is about consumer protection. Policymakers are aware that they need to have policy protection measures. The crux of it is, what do you put in there, what do you leave to the regulator? And an unintended consequence, I suppose, of that bill could be that you're trying to dictate a lot in a bill. And it's the online space. We move fast my technical colleagues, not me, move fast in the online space. And you need to allow the regulators to keep up with that. If you think of New Jersey, if the law had been really prescriptive, David Reebok and his team would not have been able to intervene unless they went to the politicians, tried to make their case, and then you have to propose an amendment. Also, there is an unintended consequences rather than, I suppose, as you've said, Nick, we always, as an industry, aim to collaborate. Should we improve? Yes, of course. But we do seek to collaborate, and we're improving in this field. There are many examples valid right now in the US of industry coming more and more together to collaborate in whichever way possible. So there is that space, yes, before you skip immediately to a phase of a federal bill.
Yep. Yeah. So it's basically, if I could summarize, it's not a very good bill because it's too prescriptive and it's taking power out of the hands of the regulators and tying people's hands so that we can't grow and implement the intention properly. Do you think that's a safe way to put it? Okay, so okay. I don't know if we can answer this next question, but I'll read it. I see the benefit for online gambling. Could AI be used in physical casinos and sports books to assist with PG detection? Also, could it be used to help avoid issues like those that have been recently uncovered in Las Vegas with money laundering at brick and mortar destinations? And they have a third question on the same one. Also, how do companies confront? Well, we'll wait. I'll save that one. But I don't. I'll tell you that I have, since before it was legal in the United States, worked in online gaming, but I don't know so much about brick and mortar, and I don't know if any of our panelists here do either. Do you think that we can weigh in on how this could be used in physical casinos and sports books, or is that sort of outside of our purview?
I can weigh in a little bit, I think, Amy. I mean, from a brick and mortar standpoint, Fanatics doesn't operate brick and mortar casinos. From a sports book standpoint, I believe that, there's obviously a level of anonymity at the sports book, right? Like you can bet up into a certain amount of money really before you're asked to provide ID. But I think interactions or transactions over that certain amount, right? If a customer is a Fanatics sportsbook customer, right, and they go to a retail location, that information does end up, in the same model that we talked about earlier, right? So I think there are certain applications, although retail just becomes, a little more of of a challenge, just at the level and you know, just not knowing who and who's in the sports, or who's betting, I should say, and how much they're betting until that certain threshold's met. So.
From my side, the only thing I would add is yes, would be the short answer. And I know that my colleagues who are responsible for Playtech Protect per se and BetBuddy, I know that they're looking into that as well, because when you want to enhance the player protection, you want to do it equally for the members. So I know that there is space to improve on that and using AI solutions, but that's as far as I can say right now.
Right.
And
Right.
maybe just to quickly, I'm sorry, Amy, just to close
No,
out.
no.
Yeah,
No,
this is actually an area that GeoComply is starting to like invest in, and we actually see it as a, you know, a heavy evolution to the retail space over the next couple of years. So we've been working on different ways to enhance what's known as cashless in the retail space. So known player cards and that movement away from maybe the cash dominated payment vehicle in the retail space. We've been working with a number of partners to develop solutions that, again, can provide not only that consumer protection, but the you know, potentially the RG solutions as well, by able to track you know, patterns right at scale. And I think that's an exciting spot that GeoComply is getting ready to scale up in.
Okay. All right. Our questioner has a third question attached, which is, how do companies confront the environmental impact of AI use? I'm interested to hear the answer to that too. I don't know how we can. Does anybody have any information about that? Yeah, that's a next frontier. I have this idea. Okay, I have a next question. Sorry, we couldn't answer that. Are there ways that AI is being used to prevent fraud on online gaming platforms? And could it be used to enhance KYC and ID verification? I mean, my understanding is that we've been pretty darn sophisticated with KYC and ID verification for some years. But have you seen a change in that? Has it become more sophisticated with the use of AI?
I can take a stab at this one. Yeah, I think especially in the last 3 months, we've seen with our partners and even with our own KYC solution that GeoComply has, is bad actors using AI to create fake documentation to either perceive them as somebody else or to try to circumvent you know, the controls that operators are putting in place for KYC, right? So having robust you know, enhancements to counter that, a good example of that is we've been working with partners that use AI to scan patterns at scale of ID cards that are getting uploaded. So for example, if the panelists here all had their identities stolen, but the fake ID had pixelation on just all of our eyes, but all of our eyes for some reason looked very similar, you know, that's where AI is actually becoming a really useful tool to spot fake IDs at scale. So it's a helpful tool. Again, it's providing protection for those who maybe are victims of identity theft, and I think that's a really powerful thing that AI is ultimately doing. Is there are victims out there? How are we at scale tackling this? You know, the regulated sports betting industry is actually doing something about it. The unregulated sports betting industry, they don't care, right? They're just money in, money out. So it's a good advancement that I think we're seeing over the last 3 months.
That's interesting. Does anybody else have anything that they Anthony, have you seen anything?
Just echoing with what Nicholas had mentioned earlier, just on the ability to review these pictures and all that, and you know, catch individuals who are maybe trying to sign up using photos they've found somewhere, you know, catch these fraudsters in the act of registering, as well as, like, you know, detecting fraud within our platform. The same way we have triggers to detect RG, you know, potential RG PG issues, we have triggers to detect fraud. I'm not going to talk too much about them and kind of, you know, give the secret sauce to kind of what we're looking for, obviously, but there are these triggers, these flags, things like that would then warrant us to do a more in-depth analysis of a customer for fraud, a potential fraud.
Yeah, and then on the opposite side of things, just what I already mentioned is how we're detecting fraud on the the match fixing side of things with AI with our system. So opposite end of it, but still using AI to detect the fraud.
So thank you. Our next question is, are there any concerns surrounding bias in AI and technology as it relates to responsible gaming? That's interesting. Who would like to weigh in on that?
I suppose it's a question that many are trying to look into now beyond only gambling, both if you think of Europe and the US. Now, when you're looking at AI and the issue of trust and bias and all of that, and governance of it and ethics of it, there's a lot that is being looked into. It's still, in a sense, relatively new at the same time. So you have legislators trying to come together and say, okay, what are the issues that we're seeing, and you address those, and then you can see that will start going down into narrowing it into individual sectors. There are papers out there. I'm not going to pretend I'm familiar with the topic in detail, but there are papers out there already looking into potential issues of bias in what the AI is detecting and those blind spots and correcting that. So there's awareness already of it and what can be done, and it's going to be one of those where it's in constant improvement. But ultimately, you are talking about its governance, you are talking about trust, you are talking about ethics. Those, I think, are quite key to all of it.
Do you know anything about that, Anthony? I mean, have you guys thought about if there's potential bias, or when the humans look at it, do they think about that?
Well, I think if anything, it helps us remove bias with respect to clearing RG cases, because it's removing the subjectivity of the analyst who would be looking at the account, right? So,
Okay.
if we use the AI model, right, and we see a score of a certain amount, right, using that to derive actions taken versus, John Smith on this team versus, Jane Doe on that team reviewing, they might think differently in how those cases should be actioned. So I would argue that it helps to reduce it, but I can totally understand why that comes up as well.
Yeah, I never thought about it, but I do think it's an interesting question. Nick, have you, GeoComply seems to think about almost everything from a macro perspective. Have you guys thought about this?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like, consumer protection is a balance, right, of privacy and how do we not become too invasive. And I think that's an evolving challenge just overall in the online space, right? We're all trying to like have a conversation like we are right now. It's like we can all see each other, we know who we are, right? That's a very difficult challenge to do in like an online platform. So I think AI ultimately is still in its infancy. And again, we touched on a little bit earlier, the right trainings and the right transparency of how AI is being used ultimately is going to let the customer feel better about how that data is being used. There was a study that was recently put out. I think it was 40 and under. Male females actually agree that they're willing to give up more data privacy rights if it results in better consumer protection. So I think if we're trending in that direction, I think there's a strong argument to be made that there's a place for it.
Well, thank you. I'm afraid that we're not going to make it to all of the questions, but I really thank everybody for sending them in. They were wonderful, and thank you to our panelists. I have really enjoyed talking to you and getting to know you, all of you, better. So to our attendees, join us for lunch tomorrow, webinar 2, where panelists are going to discuss the next wave of sports betting legislation and regulation, which we're definitely seeing coming down the pike for this year and next year. And then on Friday for webinar 3, where our General Counsel, Jeff Ifra, will be talking to 3 CEOs in the iGaming space, and they're going to talk about the most relevant issues for the implementation and future of iGaming in the US. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you to the panelists. See you later.
Okay.